Welcome back to Opening the C-Suite. I'm Mike.
Corey.
And the purpose of Opening the C-Suite is to look kind of behind the scenes at what's happening in the C-Suite and leadership teams across companies. And so we want to talk in part about the tough stuff. There's probably nothing tougher than RIFs, layoffs, reduction in force, which is what RIF stands for. And so we're going to talk about what happens in the process of a layoff or a RIF or a furlough. And as a disclaimer, this is not, hey, feel bad for the C-suite when these things happen, but everybody on both sides of that table are humans.
Yep.
And it's the toughest thing anybody in leadership goes through. And so what we want to do is just open up the hood a bit on what are the processes and the decisions that go into these things happening.
Yep.
So I've had, unfortunately, like anybody, a little bit of experience here in startup land.
Yep.
Corey, you've been at a variety of larger companies, been on the boards of startups. So I'm going to ask you most of the questions here.
Okay.
So if you can give us the primer,
Yep.
right? Just lay the land of what's the difference between a layoff versus a RIF versus a furlough? Just give us the 101.
So let's start with a reduction in force is typically I am letting these people go from the company and they're not going to come back.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So if I'm doing a layoff, I am dismissing them for a period with an expectation of potential return.
Okay.
And a furlough is similar, except furlough tends to be timed in advance. You'll be furloughed for 3 months. You're going to be furloughed for 6 months.
Okay.
You tend to know the time frame already.
Okay.
So, I've had really good heads of HR that I've worked with, and every time we're letting people go. And unfortunately, like yourself, I've had experience with this. Somebody in a meeting somewhere will say, "Oh, we're doing a layoff." It's not a layoff. These people are not coming back.
Okay.
It is a RIF. So most companies are doing a reduction in force.
Okay. And that point, it sounds like your HR leader was specified because you don't want to set a wrong expectation.
Exactly.
Okay.
You don't want to communicate to a person and say, this is a layoff, and then they have the expectation that they could come back and they get their paperwork and it says they're completely gone.
Yeah.
I don't understand. Right.
Yeah. So we see these in the news, right? Company has some kind of hiring spree that the employee count is growing over a period of years or maybe even recently. And then in the news, at least, it kind of feels like all of a sudden there's a reduction in force. There's a layoff. What happens in that period of time between the hiring spree and all of a sudden there's a layoff? Like something didn't go according to plan or what?
It's really that simple. I mean, something in your financial model doesn't hold up.
Okay.
And I'm boiling it down to the financial model because the activities of the company ultimately are represented through the financial model.
Yeah.
Right. So a new strategic investment didn't pan out.
Okay.
We were going to open a new office in a new territory. It didn't work out.
Okay.
The market conditions have changed. And we saw this in the last couple of years where the market conditions changed, and it was growth at all costs, burn money to grow. And the market condition changed. And all the investors said, there's no more investment unless you're going to show profitability.
Yeah.
So there was a change.
Yeah.
There was a change from the plan you were executing on. And that change could have happened swiftly. The change of investors. I had one CEO who I love. She said she runs a company that's strongly profitable, weren't growing enough. And she'd been working with her board for years on getting a growth plan in place. And she finally came in and said, we're going to burn some more this year, but we're going to grow. And they said, that's okay. We are into profit these days.
Meaning the market condition from the investor side.
From board meeting 1 to board meeting 2, the investor's perspective had changed because of the market. So there was a change, right? And so
which as the CEO now changes everything you've been leading on
absolutely
across the team.
That's right. That's right. And so something has changed. And if you're, as a CEO, I always had in the back of my mind, if something changes, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
Where would I go? What teams would I talk to? And I typically knew what investments we were making that's the speculative one. Can't ever touch that area, right?
Okay.
You have some feel for that.
Yeah.
The bigger the company, the less feel you have.
Sure.
And that's, you're really looking at the company through the financial lens, the larger you are, right?
Okay.
But it feels overnight, but it isn't.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that changed. That was 2 board meetings. It changed. That I mentioned that the story about profit matters, but it's like, okay, that's still 3 months and you probably had a little time to do a plan on the other side of that. Right.
So, okay. Market environment changing is a little bit of, kind of change of the weather thing. That's more so out of your control.
Or COVID.
Yeah. Right. So what I'm saying is that's like, I can't ask you, well, how do you know if the market's going to change?
That's right.
I mean, I can get your opinion.
That's right.
The stuff that, maybe more in the lens of predictability or somewhat within, executional control.
Yep.
What are some of those factors? And from the employee standpoint, or maybe across, the wider levels of management, like how do you, in some ways, keep an eye out for, are we trending in the right direction, or could this stuff happen?
Yeah.
Like, how does the CEO communicate that? So
I mean,
how do we
metrics,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, how are you tracking the progress on these investments and initiatives?
Yeah.
What are your KPIs? How frequently are you getting that data? How much do you trust that data? How
Okay.
much do you trust the people are being honest with you? How many touch points do you have in that part of the business to understand what's going on? Because if you're getting one person, and that one person is the good news network,
Yeah.
and that person just wants to make you feel good all the time, you're going to have the wrong
Meaning,
perspective.
if you're an employee and at the all hands, there's a good news network.
Well, more specifically, I've got an investment in an area. I've got a product manager. They're running that area, and that product manager wants to tell me great news all the time about the project. Maybe it's not going well.
Oh, so actually, as a CEO, you're saying sometimes you have a good news network, and
To
you've got
you,
dig in.
yeah. So as a CEO, you
right,
can't
right.
rely on a single touch point,
Yeah.
and if you do, you need to understand the context that person's going to bring it to you through.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and what we're dancing around a lot is that a RIF isn't a last minute thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And while it may look that way to the company,
Yeah.
It is about information flow. It's about tracking.
Yep.
It's about understanding, and about taking decisive action when
Yeah.
needed. I hear constantly, and I think you've probably heard this as well. People are like, well, management screwed up and they did this wrong, and that's
Yeah.
why we have to do
Right.
this now. Like, how do you react when you hear that?
Well, I react in a lot of different ways. I mean, I certainly always feel as like founder CEO, like a huge sense of ownership. You bring somebody onto the team, and you're inviting them onto
right.
this ride, and all of a sudden the ride's not there. So, you feel this huge like empathy and guilt, around it happening. Now, in explaining like, here's the sequence of events that maybe led to the environment changing or our outcomes not being what we thought. It's a tough one. We would do very proactive financial town halls.
Yep.
That would be CFO, Nick, and I, and you can't do them all the time, but we would try to do 2 or 3 a year.
And everybody doesn't want them all the time.
Yeah,
right.
right. But it's what you're saying. You try to have folks understand, especially at the startup level.
Yep.
There'd be this line that we'd say a lot at PackRec, like, we're not necessarily just like supposed to exist. Like as a startup, it's like the world was fine. Like before you were, I mean, it wasn't fine, but it was like nobody was like asking you to come enter the economy. It's like we had to like find a way to
push
be
our
here.
way in.
So I would try to have like, a following along of the journey of like, hey, for us to continue to exist, let alone expand or keep headcount, like here's where we need to go. Here's what the unit economics have to look like. And so you kind of do the best possible there. But again, there's some uncertainty. So when it doesn't happen, then what I now know from a startup standpoint, and I'm curious your take at later stages, if all of a sudden you realize we're carrying more cost than we can because the situation has changed. Now, all of a sudden, if you wait, a few weeks or a month, now maybe either the RIF has to be larger or you're just not even going to have time to do it. So I think that explains some of why it happened so suddenly. That's a hard thing to kind of understand.
It's kind of sudden, but it's not, right? It's sudden because
to the employee base,
it's sudden.
To the news or whatever, it's
right.
sudden.
Right. If I'm looking at the metrics in my weekly staff meeting, or I'm getting a dashboard or something, it's probably not that sudden, right? Unless it was COVID or something like that, right? It's probably like, we're gonna have to make a call.
Yeah. But when that data point finally got you to be convinced that, okay, we're carrying too much cost, help us understand what happens now. Like what stakeholders have to weigh in. Is it just the CEO says, hey, 20% are gone?
No,
there's more to it, right?
Number one is, what's your financial model?
Yeah.
Right. And your financial situation and the financial expectations for the company. And this is public or private, right? It is, when I was at a public company, we did a layoff. We did a RIF. See, I did it right there. We did a RIF. When we did that,
meaning permanent,
we knew we had to take a certain amount of cost out of the business to meet public expectations for our cost structure, and that drove it. If you're a private company, you may have debt on the business that's got expectations. So how deep you cut, how much you cut out of the business is very much driven by your financial model. And if you don't have a good, strong financial model, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. To go with that, you also need to involve your individual managers, your individual teams. They need to understand what the expectations are from their team. There might be a team that you're like, we can't touch you at all. You're strategic. Right. You're fine. But there are other teams. Was not prescriptive, meaning I hated going around and saying this person, that person, this person. I would prefer to go and say, here's what we need from this organization.
Yeah.
Right. And it would be the CFO and I sitting and thinking through it in the company and where would we have to make the cuts?
Yeah.
And then I'd work with the individual executives on what was the impact of those on their team if we took out X dollars.
All right. So let's talk about the means of communication.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you see pretty frequently, just on like social media, let's say, a RIF or a layoff occurs. And I don't know how many times I've seen this. The communication happened through email.
Yeah.
Now, however many employees are at the company, you see this talked about of, I can't believe it occurred on email. And I'm not saying that's the best way to have it happen, but just help us understand.
Sometimes the only way.
Well, and that's what I'm getting at is, was it that the leadership was cold-hearted and hey, we're doing an email because we don't want to talk to folks? Or is there a reason why sometimes it's a mass email? Sometimes it's, swift communication. Why does that occur?
So, I've used email many times or Slack, right? Which kind of became a replacement for email.
But the point is, it's not like not everybody had a Zoom call.
Not everybody had meaning
there's resentment that comes
notifying
from
an individual or notifying the company.
I think both. I'm just referring to just
notifying an individual. If I'm notifying an individual, they're being let go. I want them to have a call.
Oh, 1-to-1. Yes. I'm talking about if it's a 20%, layoff.
If I'm telling the company I'm going to go the quickest means of getting the information out. Having a town hall, not having a company-wide meeting to announce it isn't about avoiding the questions.
Okay.
It's about getting it out there quickly. You should follow up later with meetings. Now, if you're an international company, you can't say, I'm going to do a town hall this afternoon because the time's out. Like really simple. Yeah. And most of the companies have remote employees today. So you have someone on the West Coast and you're going to, 3-hour time difference. How are you going to do that? Yeah. So the email, the Slack post gets the information out, but you should follow it up with a company meeting. You're not dodging the question. Yep. You're just or the questions that are going to come. You're trying to get the information out there in a clear, consistent way. What you don't want is team level communication, 1-to-1 communication, and then the rumor mills beating you around the organization.
What's going through my mind is as less personal as, an email to 20% of the company can feel, if you go one by one and then the rumor mill is what circulates the information. And even if it's only a couple of hours that folks are waiting, those couple of hours can be, I think pretty tantalizing.
Big deal.
Is it Me Too or not? So at least everybody knows.
Yeah. And look, you've seen in the press lately that some very large companies, tech companies, one announced that they were going to be doing reductions as many as 7,000 people over the course of the year.
Crazy. Right.
Like, that's it goes counter to everything any executive is taught. Like, do it decisively, do it quickly, let people move on. And this is a harsh but very true thing. You have to think about the people that are still in the org. Treat the people that are leaving well. Yeah. Do as good as you can by them, as nice a package as you can, outplacement help if you can. Yep. Whatever the organization can offer the people that are departing resources, do it.
Yep.
But you have to move on quickly to making sure the people that remain with the organization know why they're there, know why we don't want this to happen again, understand what we're doing, and let them start to heal. Let them start to feel better about the organization.
And on that, so, I don't have as much experience in this, but there's two main moments throughout my, 10, 12 years that we had a situation like this. And I remember the thought that, we had as a leadership team and I had personally was in deciding what the number was. Yeah. We wanted to make sure it occurred once.
Sure.
And the biggest fear I had was we're going to actually come up with a smaller number.
Yep.
And 6 weeks later, we're going to have to do it again.
I made that mistake.
And now what's the culture like?
So
you make the mistake and now it happens again.
That's
How
right.
do you have?
Yeah. So that comes to the communication of the culture. Here's the only fortunate aspect to my mistake was I did a lot of communication of the company. And so when
a lot of confidence building communication.
Status of the company communication.
Oh, okay.
People understood our situation.
Okay.
And said, this is where we're at.
Yeah.
This is the action we're going to take. But these are the metrics we're watching.
Yeah. Okay.
And if these metrics aren't hit, we may have to do it again.
Because people it wasn't a random surprise.
That's right. So people always say, are you going to do it again? Is this the only time? Right. You can never say no. Mentor of mine always used to say, I reserve the right to change my mind.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And he's right, because circumstances change. So in the situation where I screwed up, I we did a reduction, but I had communicated up to the reduction what was going on with our numbers.
Yeah.
And we were having a problem. And people in the company said, I get it. I see why we had to do it. I don't like it. I get it. But I then in that said, but these are the new numbers.
Yeah. And
then every 2 weeks I was reporting against those numbers.
Yeah.
And we weren't holding up. Mm-hmm. And somebody who was not on the management team came and said, we're gonna have to do another one, aren't we? Yeah. And I think so.
Well, none of this is cool, but what's cool about that specific moment you just stated was it actually came to you from a team member.
And I was doing step level one-on-one. So yeah.
Yeah. But it was like you had communicated what we're watching and the status of those metrics.
That's right.
Enough that everybody kind of saw, all right, here's what's coming. Because then in that regard, it's like you want, if the team wants to be there and it's a good culture, it's like you want the RIF number to be as small as possible because you want to have at least the chance for that team to stay as strong as possible.
That's right.
Those are the two conflicting things. You don't want to do it twice, but you want to keep as much of the team intact.
And it's the hardest. I mean, look, this is in the CEO role, the thing that tore me apart the most, right? You hated the personal impact. You hated the impact on the strategy and the things you were doing. You hated the changes that were going to have to be made to what investments we were making and so on. But that is the hard balance. How do you minimize the frequency of these changes? How do you maximize the remaining organization? And how do you do as little damage as possible?
Yeah.
It's an art, not a science, but that's what you're there to do. It softens it if you're very open with the company as much as you can. In public companies, are just things you can't say. Yeah. So you're just stuck. But in private companies, you can say a little bit more. Sure. And some investors don't like when you do. So I always negotiate to say more to the company than they may have been comfortable with. But they would see the stage being set and they would understand that it happened and why it was going to happen. And while they didn't love it, didn't like to see their friends go away, people that they liked, some of them realized they were taking on more responsibility. They understood it. And that made the healing a little easier. Didn't make the situation easier. It made the healing a little easier. And don't forget, there is healing after this. This is one of the most emotional things you'll do as an employee is see someone next to you being let go.
Yeah. Yeah. And there is healing after it, I think that's like the headline there.
Yes.
I guess last question, what's one piece of advice to, folks rising into the C-suite out there that you can do to optimize the healing?
To optimize the healing, communication. Be very clear to them what's going to change. Okay. What the worst situations is when someone says, "Oh, just had to happen. Don't know why, but we're going to have to do it," or they blame it on the board. "Oh, the board said we have to do it."
Yeah, right. Have to own it.
You have to own it, and then you have to be clear to them how you're going to proceed and not have to do it again.
Yeah.
Right. Just have a strategy, have a plan. Don't just be like, board told me to cut costs. We'll see what we can do. And I have seen that before.
Yeah. Rough. All right. Well, I think we've opened the C-suite pretty